Hey solo gamers, thanks for checking out How's It Play Solo. I'm Mac Kern. Today I'm going to be taking a look at Hostage Negotiator. This is a one-player only game where you are working to save a group of hostages from the evil hands of an abductor. Let's check it out. When you set up a game of Hostage Negotiator, you have to select an abductor to play against. And these abductors provide a little bit of additional setup information. So if I face off against Arcane, I'm going to place 7 hostages into the hostage pool. I'm going to set the game's starting threat level to 4, and I also have to put one of Arcane's major demands into play. And this is not the same every time. There's a couple of these to choose from, so I'm going to shuffle these up. Choose one randomly. This starts face down. I don't know what his demand is right off the bat. He also requires an escape demand, and again, there are a handful of these to choose from. I'm going to place one face down. And some abductors also have special rules for their scenario. Arcane isn't one of those. There are 3 abductors included in the base game, and I think that there are 4 additional abductors that you can buy as sort of mini expansions for the game. Before you start playing, you have to put together your terror deck, and so you randomly select 10 of the included 21 red terror cards, and additionally you have to select 1 of the included 6 pivotal event terror cards, and you're going to place that card on the bottom of your terror deck. Finally, you're going to draw your starting hand of 6 cards, and these starting cards are marked with the blue conversation bubble with the number 0 in the bottom right corner. And you're going to organize the rest of the conversation cards according to cost, which again is in the bottom right hand corner, and also by name, because for some of the lower cost cards there are multiple copies and you're going to keep those together. Your goal in a game of Hostage Negotiator is to save more than half of the hostages in the hostage pool. To win the game, the hostage pool has to be completely empty. And also, you have to either capture or eliminate the abductor. Turns consist of 3 phases. The first phase is the conversation phase. And in that phase, you have the opportunity to play cards from your hand. There's a couple different ways to play the cards that you have, and I'll go over those in a moment. During the second phase, the spend phase, you can spend conversation points that you gather during the first phase to purchase new cards to use for future turns. And during the third phase, the terror phase, you draw and resolve the top card of the terror deck. So, most of the time when you play a card, if you're using it for its main ability, there are 3 possible outcomes, and the outcome that you have to use is determined by the results of a threat roll that you make. And when you make a threat roll, you roll a number of dice that corresponds with the current threat level. So, if your threat is between 2 and 6, you're rolling 2 dice. If you have anything below that, you roll 3 dice. And super high threat level above 6, you are only rolling 1 die. Now the dice in this game are 6-sided. They are numbered 1 through 6. Sides 1 through 3 are blank. Sides 5 and 6 have this badge icon that designates a success. And side 4 has an icon to remind you that if you roll a 4, you can discard 2 cards from your hand face down to change that to a success. So the cards have 3 separate outcomes. If I play this card, first turn of the game, as of right now, my threat level is 4, so I'm rolling 2 dice. If I roll 2 successes, I can reduce the threat level by 1, and I gain a conversation point. If I only roll 1 success, I still get to take the threat level down 1. If I don't roll any successes, I lose a conversation point. You can actually go into the negatives on that track. There's a couple other icons that are worth going over, and these are conveniently located on the back of the manual. Some cards have effects that give you more or less dice to roll during threat rolls. And anytime you see this green meeple silhouette, that's you saving a hostage. So you get to move a hostage from the pool up to the saved area. Conversely, anytime you see this ominous red skull, you're moving a hostage from the pool down to this area at the bottom, which is for hostages that have been killed by the abductor. And some cards have this icon, which forbids you from playing any more cards for the rest of the conversation phase. In addition to playing cards face up for their effects, you can also play any number of cards from your hand face down to gain 1 conversation point apiece. Now, there are cards that give you conversation points, but they require dice rolls, and some of those have negative effects that correspond to poor dice rolls. So while this card is great, if you roll 2 successes, you gain 3 conversation points. It's a safer bet to play a card face down for 1 conversation point, because you don't have to roll any dice. You don't have to worry about any negative outcomes associated with that. During the setup overview, I mentioned putting demands into play to correspond with the abductor that you're playing against. 2 of the cards in your starting hand allow you to reveal those demands by turning them face up. And the major demands give you a powerful ability to use, but at a cost. So once I've revealed this, during any conversation phase, I can spend 4 conversation points to take any 2 cards into my hand. And that's pretty cool because some of these cards are pretty expensive. This card costs 6. This card costs 8. And so that's a pretty cool ability to use. However, once I've activated this ability, I turn this card sideways, and there's an associated penalty. And so these are kind of cool to use late game, but if you use one early game, then this penalty is gonna, the negative effects of that are gonna kind of snowball. And like I said, there's a couple different major demands associated with each abductor to keep the game fresh. But in general, these major demands give you a cool ability, but they also hurt you in the long run. Some abductors also have escape demands, and these are pretty cool thematically because, if I concede this demand by giving him an armored truck, I can spend 4 conversation points. I get to use a great ability where I take any card for free, and during my next threat roll, I get an extra die. But if I don't win the game during this turn, the abductor gets away and I lose. So the demand cards are cool, but they're kind of a really strong way to make a last push during the game. When you play cards from your hand during the conversation phase, you have the option to play as many or as few cards as you want. Unless you encounter one of these icons that keeps you from playing any conversation cards, you could play your whole hand if you wanted to. But you don't have to. You can stop at any time. You can save cards in your hand for future turns. After you've played all of the cards that you want to play, you'll be keeping track of any conversation points that you acquire during that phase. So if I acquire 3 conversation points, I've got 3 conversation points to spend. So if I buy these 2 cards, my total is 3. If I would only spend 2, let's say I only buy this card, that extra conversation point that I don't use is just kind of wasted, because at the end of this phase, your conversation points always gets reset to 0. So there's kind of an incentive to take, if I can take an extra card, there's no reason for me not to, other than you do have a hand limit of 10 cards. You can never exceed that. After you've bought cards during the spend phase, you take all of the cards that you played from your hand in the previous round, and again, you sort them by name and cost, and you actually add those back to the buy area. And in future rounds, these cards are available for purchase again. It's pretty interesting to note that the zero cost cards, the ones that you start the game with, you are able to add those to your hand during the spend phase, even if you have a negative number of conversation points. So some of the card effects might cause you to lose conversation points. If you're going into a spending phase with -2, -3 conversation points, you can still pick up these free cards at any time. During the terror phase, you reveal and resolve the top card of the terror deck. A lot of these cards have negative effects, so this card in particular increases the threat level by 1, and then if there are any unrevealed demands, it increases the threat level by 1 again. Sometimes the top card of the terror deck will just have the abductor killing a hostage, and maybe increasing the terror level as well. In addition to sending some bad vibes your way, the terror deck also acts as a timer for the game, because if you don't win on the turn following the terror phase where you draw this pivotal event, then you lose. You run out of time. So some of the terror cards just kind of serve to accelerate the depletion of the terror deck. And now's a good time to note, because a lot of these cards increase the terror level, and there are cards that you can play during your conversation phase that increase the terror level as well. But you have this, the highest level on the terror track is marked with a K. That's when you're only rolling 1 die. If you ever rise above that level on the track, you just kind of keep the threat marker where it's at. But if you raise the terror level by 1, you kill 1 hostage. If you're supposed to raise the terror level by 2, you kill 2 hostages. So it's kind of important to keep threat in check as well as you can. On the flip side, if you are at the lowest threat level and a game effect would have you lowering the terror level, you save a hostage. So that can kind of be an effective way. If you are managing the threat very well, you have the opportunity to save some hostages. When I was explaining how to win the game, I mentioned that you have to capture or eliminate the abductor to win the game. So if your pool of hostages is empty, so maybe you have 3 hostages that have been killed and 4 hostages that have been saved, anytime a game effect would allow you to save a hostage, instead you capture the abductor, and you win the game. Anytime if the hostage pool is empty and you're supposed to resolve an abductor being killed, what you do is you draw the next red terror card from the deck. So if you're on the last card, if you're about to reveal the pivotal event, you don't do that. But if your hostage pool is empty and you're supposed to kill a hostage, then you just kind of reveal the top card of the terror deck without resolving it and put it in the discard pile. Instead of capturing the abductor, you can also eliminate him. There are some cards that allow you to do that. And these are high cost cards, and it's sort of a high risk, high reward thing. I'll also point out that if your abductor escapes, you automatically lose the game. If you ever have more than half of the hostages in your pool killed, so I start the game with 7, if I would ever have a 4th hostage killed, I would automatically lose the game as well. But I can win by eliminating the abductor. And again, I mentioned before, you have to have an empty hostage pool to actually win the game. So if I eliminate this guy, this card, if I get double success, I save 4 hostages, I eliminate the abductor. If there's still hostages left in the pool, then my abductor is replaced by his second in command. And the second in command is crazy. Anytime the threat level would increase at all, he kills a corresponding number of hostages. So if I've got 3 hostages left in my pool, I eliminate the abductor, and then my threat level increases by 2, then this guy's going to kill 2 hostages. But he will never, ever kill the last hostage in the pool. When you save that last hostage, or if the last hostage would die due to a game effect, this guy automatically surrenders. And, as long as you have still saved half of the hostages, you would win based on that condition as well. I'm a huge fan of a lot of small box solo games, and Hostage Negotiator fills a really unique role in my collection. One of the things that I think is most interesting about this game is how you have to play around the dice. I know when I look at the cards in my hand, I kind of get suckered into thinking, if I play this card, I get to save 2 hostages, but that only happens if I roll 2 successes during my threat roll, and that, very rarely happens. So I think it's really interesting how you have to kind of plan ahead for bad rolls. You have this temptation to take a slow and steady approach and play cards face down to get 1 conversation point at a time, kind of work your way up to some of the more powerful cards in the game. But the longer you take to acquire those cards, the smaller the terror deck gets, and you risk running out of time. So I think it's really clever how the game forces you to take risks. Sometimes you're just going to be rolling the dice and hoping for the best, and you're rewarded for being able to plan ahead for situations like that. I think the theme shines through pretty strongly. It's a pretty unique theme. It's pretty dark, but I think it works pretty well. I mentioned earlier that I like the way that the escape demands are thematically integrated. If you provide your abductor with a vehicle, you have to win during that phase, during the next conversation phase, or else he escapes in that vehicle that you provided for him. One thing that I didn't get to show is that once you draw and resolve that pivotal event terror card, the last terror card in the deck, you have 1 more conversation phase to try to win the game. And as a last-ditch attempt to win the abductor over, any conversation points that you accumulate during that conversation phase, you get to spend those during the phase. You can acquire new cards and actually spend those in the same phase that you acquire them. And so it's just a really cool way for the theme to shine through. Hostage Negotiator is a really interesting game. It's frustrating, but the wins that you pull out are going to be memorable. And one final thing that I want to add is that there has been so much thought put into keeping this game fresh. I mentioned that there are 3 different abductors included in the base game, and each one of those has a little bit of variation within their demand cards. Also, the terror deck isn't going to look the same between any 2 games because you use less than half of the provided terror cards for each game. So there's just a lot of thought put into adding to the replayability of this experience. Hostage Negotiator is a cool game. Check it out.